Here, starting Unit 6 with the industrialism and the race for empire and also the world at war. All of these are covered in Unit 6, the time span from 1700 to 1950. Now, today we also start Chapter 25, which is known as the Industrial Revolution. Now, this is a little bit more specific time span from 1700 to 1900. Section 1 is the beginnings of industrialization. So today we'll be focused in learning about how the Industrial Revolution began and where it began, which we should all know is in Britain. Now, Roman numeral 1 says the introduction. Capital letter A is the Industrial Revolution. It was a period of increase in machine-made goods that began in England in the mid-1700s. So this is the time when machines began to replace human hands for the production of goods. Roman numeral number 2, as we move down throughout the lesson, is going to be titled Industrial Revolution Begins in Britain. It's very important to understand why the Industrial Revolution began in Britain. First off, we can't have the Industrial Revolution without first having an agricultural revolution. So we need to take a look at that here in capital letter A. Beginning in 1700, wealthy landowners began to purchase small farms, and they also started to introduce improved farming methods. Most of these farming methods were based off of scientific studies that came out of the Enlightenment period. Point number 2 is that landowners combined all of their lands together into larger fields in which they then placed fences around to both mark their territory, keep animals out, and also these were known as enclosures. There's a key term right there. These are large fields closed in either by wooden fences, sometimes metal fences at the time, or hedges, which are large bushes that you can plant in a row to keep a boundary line. The landowners used scientific methods, as I said earlier, to improve farm production. There really were two important results of their endeavors. First, subletter A, new agricultural methods in seeding and harvesting improve what we call crop yield. Crop yield is basically out of how many seeds you plant, how many of those seeds produce an actual edible crop. Subletter B, small farmers were, because of these big farmers making these big movements, they were forced into tenant farming or to give up farming entirely and to move into cities. Now, the way that you can kind of think about this is, when you have a small town, you've got a lot of local small businesses. When a Walmart or a Target or a Meijer moves in, it kind of forces some of those smaller businesses to close down because they can't compete with the large scale price and the great prices that some of those big box stores can give you. And that was the case with farming. And most of these people had to become tenant farmers, which meant that they rented land from the big farmers to farm off of. Also, point number 4 here, in 1701, the seed drill, a major invention, was created by a scientific farmer named Jethro Tull. Now, the seed drill placed individual seeds down into the soil at specific depths and in very manageable rows. So it created a nice, neat environment to grow your crops. This was kind of changing the way that it used to be done because, before this invention, farmers would just go out and they would throw their seeds on top of the ground. This was called the casting method. And this improvement meant that more seeds, because they're being planted in certain depths in the ground, would take root and produce crops. Capital letter B is another agricultural movement called crop rotation. This is basically changing what crops are planted on certain fields each year. This process restored the nutrients in the soil by basically what you have to understand is that if you plant a crop at the same level of the soil year in and year out, it will use all of the nutrients from that level of the soil. So what you want to do is each year you want to plant a deep-rooted crop, and then the next year you want to plant a shallow-rooted crop, and that will allow those crops and the roots to draw nutrients from different layers of the soil, and it will prevent your soil from exhausting. Point number 2 is that livestock breeding also improved because breeders, they began to only mate their strongest and largest stock, which produced larger and stronger offspring. So this was scientifically advanced movement here in trying to get your animals bred and producing offspring there that were going to survive and will give you what we say more bang for the buck, or basically more money out of wool, out of animal products, out of meat that you can get from those animals. This increased the food supply, and anytime that we've talked this year, when you increase the food supply, it also leads to a possible growth in population. Now, the check number 2 question here for understanding: how did population growth help propel the Industrial Revolution? Well, farmers began to move to cities where they looked for factory jobs. Because of a lot of those farmers losing their farms, having to become tenant farmers, they began to fulfill jobs in factories, making t-shirts, making cloth, making tools, things of that nature. Now, the very important question here is capital letter C: where did the Industrial Revolution begin, and of course, why? Well, it began in England for 2 very important reasons. There are more. We're going to focus on 2. Subletter A, the very large population of workers, and subletter B, extensive natural resources. England is a plethora of natural resources. Point number 2, the industrialization process. This is basically a process where you develop machine production of goods. So you need to build factories, you need to create the machines, and then you need to put people at work, housing, and running those machines. Let's talk about the natural resources that were available in England. Things like water, power, and coal to fuel these early factory machines, iron ore for construction of the machines, and of course the buildings, the factories to house them, rivers for inland transportation of said goods that were being produced in these factories, and of course large-scale harbors for merchant ships that could then send the British goods to the rest of the world. Point number 4 is a key term called the factors of production. This is going to be really important when we get into talking later in the year about capitalism versus communism versus socialism. It all really comes down to who owns the factors of production. The factors of production are the resources needed to produce goods and services that industrialization required or still requires today. The basic factors of production are land, labor, and capital. Now, capital means wealth, of course. So those are your factors of production. Who owns those factors of production basically determines your economic system. Point number 5, England had all of the factors of production to host the Industrial Revolution. So if you wanted to really get into this, what were some other factors that supported industrialization in England? Well, an expanding economy. You had a growth in overseas trade due to exploration. You also have investment in new machinery, and you also have really powerful military success in England throughout their history. Roman numeral 3 is going to talk about some of the inventions that what we say spur or catalyzed industrialization. Capital letter A, British textile industry. Well, the British were really responsible for creating the clothing that supported most of the world with linen, wool, and cotton manufacturing. If you were getting clothes during this time, most of them were built in the British Empire. That doesn't mean in mainland England, possibly in their American colonies or other colonies that they had throughout the world. Capital letter B is going to talk about major inventions. There's a list right here that we can go through. In 1733, John Kay invents the flying shuttle. This was sort of the first small part of a machine that moves back and forth to supply basic thread to different parts of the machine. I am going to have a slideshow, which I will be able to post here for you guys to check out at the end of this chapter, so you can see sort of what some of these things look like. Then in 1764, an inventor named James Hargreaves invented something called the spinning jenny, which he named after his daughter. It was a developed machine that moved thread back and forth to create sheets of cloth. All of the early machines that were developed were predicated on the clothing or textile industries. Point number 3 is that in 1769, Richard Arkwright invented what's called the water frame. This ran off of water power from an outside source like a river or a stream, which then turned a ball bearing, which then turned a wheel inside the factory to drive and propel all of the machines. Point number 4, in 1779, Samuel Crompton sort of combined the spinning jenny and the water frame to create what he called the spinning mule. It was just an advancement. It increased the strength and quality of the threads. And then in 1787, Edmund Cartwright invents the Power Loom, which further sped up this whole entire process. A lot of you guys, when you buy your t-shirts, you'll notice that a famous brand is called Fruit of the Loom. Well, the loom is a reference to this machine that is still used today. Of course, it's more technical and it's ran off of computers, but the Power Loom was a major invention that sped up the process of producing cloth. Capital letter C is going to talk about factories. Factories were the number one buildings that drove industrialization. These are large buildings that could house very large machines, very basic definition. But things like the water frame, the spinning mule, and the power loom were large and expensive machines. They needed to be placed in factories. Now, what's very important here is point number 3. You must know that factories were most often stationed near rivers and streams to utilize water power. Most of your early factories ran off of water wheels, and so they had to be close to a fast-moving water system, such as a river or stream, to make them useful. Capital letter D is going to talk about cotton. Now, if you're going to be producing textiles in a factory, you have to start with the basic resource of cotton. Most of England's cotton at this time was coming from plantations in the American South. The process of removing seeds from raw cotton was extremely difficult, very hard work. It cut up your hands quite often. This type of work was being done by slaves in the American South. It was very time consuming and, once again, extremely hard work for them to take the seeds and remove them from the raw cotton. Now, the raw material of cotton, the development of it was expanded in 1793 when an American inventor named Eli Whitney invented what's called the cotton gin to speed up the process. It's basically a machine that looks like a box with a crank. It increased the amount of cotton that could be cleaned and de-seeded by many times. For example, American cotton production improved drastically from 1.5 million pounds in 1790 to 85 million pounds in 1810. So you see that there was a major improvement with Eli Whitney's development of the cotton gin. What you probably don't know is that Eli Whitney is more well known for what he called interchangeable parts, which actually allowed the making of guns to have the same trigger that would be developed, or other parts of the gun which you could interchange with any other gun that was produced by a Whitney factory. Prior to this, guns and other things were made entirely by hand, and every single part was handmade, so they had different sizes. They would not fit in all of the other machines that were created at the time by hand. Now, Roman numeral 4 is going to talk about improvements in what we call transportation. You have the Watts steam engine making a major improvement. As early as 1705, we had steam engines that were being used to pump water out of mines. The problem was the early version was extremely expensive. And so it wasn't until 1765 that an inventor named James Watt was able to develop a steam engine that worked faster and burned less fuel. In 1774, Watt, who was more of a scientific guy, not much of a businessman, he joined with a businessman named Matthew Boulton. Now, Matthew Boulton was what was known as an entrepreneur. This is a business person. An entrepreneur is someone who can organize, manage, and take on the risks of business. So that teaming of James Watt and Matthew Boulton is kind of like an athlete and a sports agent. You know, there's one guy who's doing the work, and there's one guy who's making the decisions and becoming the money man. I would say that Watt was the athlete in this situation, and Boulton was the money man or the agent. Now, when you take a look at capital letter B, water transportation, here comes an American inventor named Robert Fulton. He used one of the Watt steam engines to first propel a boat. He named this first what we call steamboat the Clermont, and it made its first voyage in the Hudson River in New York in the year 1807. Water transportation in England also improved due to the construction of what we call man-made waterways. We call those canals. Capital letter C is going to talk about road transportation. One of the key figures here is John McAdam. He was an engineer during the early 1800s, and he also utilized his efforts to improve the way roads were constructed. Basically, it's simple. He used crushed stone rocks on the top of roads in a very smooth layer. These are called gravel roads today. Today, you guys are used to, concrete and blacktop. Back then, most of your roads were made out of dirt. So when you take the crushed stones and you place them on top of the dirt and soil, it prevents vehicles, which at these times were basically horse and buggies, from getting stuck in mud. So even if it rains, if you have crushed stones on top of the road, it allows you to have traction for transportation. Roman numeral 5 is the final part of today's lesson. It's going to talk about how the railway age begins. And this is when we have railroads and railroad tracks run by steam locomotives. So you take a Watt steam engine and now you put it into a locomotive or a train engine in 1804. The man responsible for this was Richard Trevithick. He designed a locomotive that was steam powered and, of course, ran on tracks. These tracks today are known as railroads. Then, in 1821, a famous railroad engineer named George Stephenson expanded upon this idea by building the world's first railroad line. It was 27 miles. It ran from the English town of Yorkshire, which held coal fields, to the English port city of Stockton, which was on the North Sea. This railroad was first put into use in 1825. Then you had what's called the Liverpool-Manchester Railroad. Today we understand that Liverpool and Manchester are two very famous and rivals in soccer. But back in this time, they were connected by one of the world's first railroads. A businessman in northern England heard of the news, then wanted to build a railroad from the port city of Liverpool to the inland city of Manchester. George Stephenson then designed a new locomotive, which was called the Rocket, and this railroad opened in 1830. Now, the Rocket had an amazing speed of the time at 25 miles per hour. I know this doesn't sound like much, but this was a huge success in the mid-1800s. Now, the folks that rode on this Rocket, I've read some of the documents, and they wrote about their first ride on the Rocket locomotive, which traveled at a maximum speed of 25 miles per hour. They said things like, "Oh man, I instantly had a headache," or some wrote that, "Oh, they thought their bowels were going to be dislodged from their body." Imagine taking these folks that were living in 1830 and putting them at Cedar Point on the top thrill dragster and see what they'd have to say about that. Capital letter C to end the lesson is 4 major effects of the railroads. These are 4 very important points. This would be very valid for a short answer type of question. Number 1, it created a cheap source of transportation for what we call raw materials and then manufactured products which were made in factories. Point number 2, new jobs for workers and miners were available. Iron was needed for the locomotive train trucks. Subletter B, coal was needed to run the steam engines as they became more popular. Number 3, increased transportation of fresh fish and agricultural products. And number 4, improved travel for workers to have and take jobs in distant cities. No longer did you have to walk to work. You could, if your town had a train, you could connect to that train. It was going to make certain stops at different factory towns on the way so you could have a job and live in a distant city. Final note today, there is a cause and effects chart that I can reproduce from page 721. If anybody's interested in seeing that, please just let me know. Guys, thanks for listening. I know that this was a long lesson, but the Industrial Revolution is very important for the future of world history. Thank you.